welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Writers Toolshed. I'm your host, Richie Billing, and today we return to our series on creating lifelike characters with an exploration of moral psychology with the brilliant political psychologist, Abby. We'll be getting into the nuts and bolts of what makes people tick, how people justify their actions, and how we decide what is right and what is wrong. So if you're looking to create characters with interesting contradictions and beliefs, or those morally grey heroes and villains we all tend to love, you're going to want to hear what we've got to say in this episode. Before we get into it though, just a few very quick reminders. Firstly, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe or follow the show. You'll never miss an episode if you do so, and your support also really does make a huge difference in encouraging us to keep on going. Linked to that are reviews and ratings. If you have a moment to spare, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or giving us a quick rating on the Spotify mobile app. Lots of people have rated us so far, and it really does mean a hell of a lot. If you do find the show useful and you think that others may do too, please consider sharing it with them. On Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all the rest, they're amazing places to share links to episodes or to the show as a whole. And with any writer friends that you think may enjoy it as well. We don't make any money from what we do, so word of mouth marketing makes or breaks us. So please help us spread the word. If you would like to take your learning beyond this podcast, check out our Patreon page. You can find lots of resources like fantasy writing classes on writing novels and building worlds. And you can also get a copy of my book, A Fantasy Writer's Handbook, which has just hit 110 reviews on Amazon, all 1 star. Just kidding, of course. But thank you, everyone who's left a review. And lastly, I invite you to join our writing group. We congregate on Facebook and Discord. The Discord channel is getting very active. It's been really good chatting with people, especially because it's so instant as well. I really do like Discord. We chat about literally every aspect of writing, and there is a large fantasy element to that as well. So please do get involved. You can also find beta readers. You can get advice on ideas and just stay in the loop with calls for submissions and changes in the markets. To join us, just click the link in the description. That's them jobs done. Now we can start, and I'm delighted to welcome back to the Toolshed Abby from the fantastic YouTube channel Political Psych with Abby. Welcome back to another discussion about the psychology of the human mind. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Abby from the fantastic YouTube channel Political Psych with Abby. Abby, how's it going?
It's going well. And you?
Very good. Yeah, I'm all right, yeah. Are you feeling better?
Yeah, much better.
I know, it was nasty. Sounded really nasty what you had.
Yeah.
Thankfully, it all seems to be simmering again, no COVID. And
yeah. Well, I'm boosted now, and having had it, at least I won't get it again for a while.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I know a guy who's had it 4 times.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah. He's quite an unlucky person, to be fair.
Yeah.
So you're very kind enough to come back and to expand upon our chat about psychology. We spoke quite generally about it last time, and I think it's such an interesting subject. It's definitely worth digging deeper and looking at some specific theories and different ways that we can explore how to create characters that are essentially just like real people. So moral psychology, this is something that I think you mentioned in the last episode, and when we had a chat afterwards, we decided that it would be well worth exploring a bit more. Can you tell us a bit about what moral psychology is?
So moral psychology is basically, what it says on the tin. It's the psychology of morality. So it's sort of how people make, choices in, situations where there could be a choice that would be seen as immoral or moral. But it's also how they justify those choices to other people, moral reasoning. And also it's about, how systems of morality develop and how they vary from person to person and between cultures, between groups, that kind of thing, and over time.
Yeah, I think I studied psychology a while ago, and I think we did touch upon moral psychology. And when I was researching a bit for this episode, I came across a few things that I studied in philosophy as well. So is there a bit of an overlap between psychology and philosophy with this particular theory?
Definitely, yeah. I would say that the psychology is more geared around how people think about morality rather than like what is moral.
Yeah.
But there definitely is, you can't, with the psychology element, you can't avoid the philosophical element of, what actually is good and isn't, right? So, that philosophy stuff definitely comes into it with the psychology.
What do you think about the morality debate in the fantasy genre as well? Because I think it seems to be one of the go-to ones is good versus evil, isn't it? That sort of exploration of what is good, what is evil.
I mean, that's the issue, which is that most people think they're good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, sometimes they just think that they're self-interested. And I guess sometimes they're, spiteful or they want revenge or something. But there aren't a ton of people who just sort of think of themselves as evil unless they're like, I don't know, like some edgy 14-year-old or something, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing to give your audience like obvious good and evil sides. I'm not going to say that like every story has to be morally ambiguous, right? I do believe that sometimes there are genuine good guys, but most people think that they are, the good guys, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think probably Lord of the Rings is the go-to example where you've got clear divide lines between good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
There's no real justification. There probably is deep down in the Silmarillion or somewhere behind why Sauron's on the path of destruction that he is, but you just accept it really because it's a good story. But there are sort of like he's clearly evil, and you've got like the hobbits, which are the epitome of pure and innocence, aren't they? Yeah, but what I'm starting to really enjoy the more contemporary fantasy, which explores characters who were like wholly justified in what or believe that they're wholly justified in what they're doing, even though from our perspective it's the wrong thing to do. And it's something I like to do. I think in my novel Prize Lament, a great protagonist who for half of the story we're led to believe is evil, and then I introduce his perspective and then slowly build up the picture, and then you get to see, hang on, he's not actually the bad guy, really, if anything. And that's what I mean. It's like it's all a matter of perspective, and that was the whole point. Is that like I can lead you down one path, but is it necessarily the right path? And I think a lot of you probably know it very well in political psychology. Everything like there's a lot of misleading information out there and motives behind pulling us in one direction. Or I mean, one example, for example, Boris Johnson in this country was getting absolutely hammered in the press. Everyone was calling for him to quit. So what did he do to get popularity? He kind of basically ended COVID restrictions. So, you know what I mean? There's motivations between everything. I went off on a bit of a rumble there.
Sorry, I'm now just imagining a fantasy villain based off of Boris Johnson, and it's a really funny concept.
Yeah, we need to do that.
Anyway, what was I going to say? I definitely get the matter of perspective thing is really important. I mean, not everything is a matter of perspective, and that is definitely something I want to hammer home because there are some people within political psychology that definitely take what I would say is sort of too relativist. Everyone just has their own perspective approach to morality, which I very strongly disapprove of, right? But moral complexity is something that is, good to realize and to have in stories. And, the fact that, good people can have different perspectives, I think is, worth acknowledging. I just think that there are limits to that, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. Something which I find is interesting. Obviously, it's used a lot in fantasy, and something that we spoke about last time as well, and that's religion. And I think religion's a really good vehicle for promoting rules, like or for like what is good. Do you like the Ten Commandments? Like, you can't really deny that they're quite useful. Do you know, in terms of like setting some general conventions of like,
I mean,
respect other people, don't rob, don't steal, don't kill.
I'm not a religious.
I'm not religious as well. Yeah, I'm just saying, like, religion as a concept is a useful way to promote a moral way of life. Maybe.
Yeah, the thing is, though, that I think it's important to keep in mind that there is like moral thinking and moral reasoning around morals that aren't necessarily good, right? And that is something that comes up a lot with religion, because there are a lot of things that religion ends up being quite like morally righteous about that aren't necessarily moral, right? Like, so there are a lot of religions that think, that, putting limits on what women can do with their bodies is, very moral, very righteous, that kind of thing. And that is moral reasoning. That is moral psychology, the way they're thinking about that. But I would say that doing that isn't a moral thing, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is a way. It is a way to have a moral system, right, in a society. But I do think that morality can exist independently of religion, and it is
definitely, yeah.
And it is, it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, right? Whether people had a lot of this, moral reasoning and then wrote it down in the form of religion, and I think some of that is that, right? But then how much of it is the influence coming from religion versus the influence of people's already existing morality onto religion, if you get what I'm saying. You get this with the fact that there are like so many different interpretations of religious texts, and you end up with somewhat different moral systems around them and that kind of thing. I mean, I don't know, Quakerism is supposed to be, all peace loving and accepting and stuff. And Richard Nixon was a Quaker. So like, though he might have been a lapsed Quaker, actually, I'm not sure I'm remembering that well. But you get what I mean, right?
Well, humanity is full of contradictions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I suppose it's just different people's ways of trying to explain the mysteries of the world, how things work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that part of the reason that I'm not necessarily assuming that like morality through religion is always like top down from the religion onto people rather than from people onto the religion is maybe a little bit because like I'm not religious, but like my background is Jewish. And that doesn't have like a hierarchical structure in the same way that a lot of religions do. And so, having your own interpretation of it is pretty standard, if you get what I'm saying. Yeah. But I mean, I'm not a religious person, right? And I think part of the reason for that is that I see some of the actions taken by God in the Old Testament as immoral. So, yeah.
So it all ties back into morality, doesn't it? Good and evil. What is right and what is wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. But the idea that, I mean, it is interesting that I think one interesting thing about religion is that it encourages people to apply different moral standards to, God or gods than they do to other people. Yeah. And I think sometimes that'll extend to applying different moral standards to religious figures, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think it's definitely easier to rally behind a figure, or sorts of concepts can be hard to motivate people, I suppose. I don't really know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, people are about people, right? I mean, ideas do matter, but we're very social animals, right? Someone can have the best ideas in the world and there's not going to be a movement around them unless they're the right kind of person for it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And something that something that sort of you were touching towards there, which again I find is a really interesting discussion, is whether morality is an innate thing or whether it's learned. And so what do you think about that?
So it's probably a mix of the two, a mix of nurture and nature. Most things in psychology are. There is evidence that some variation in people's political or moral reasoning and the way they sort of view the world from a moral perspective might be genetic. And then, of course, there's, sort of largely universals across human culture, which suggests that maybe there is something pretty innate going on there. But there are, variations across cultures, right? And across, families and that kind of thing. And people do, learn certain elements, especially the nuances of morality, from their families and those around them and that kind of thing. So I would say that it's a mix of the two.
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? And I was thinking about it before, and I kind of see like a bit of an internal struggle sometimes with like human instinct and morality. So I see it in people's reactions to homeless people.
Yeah.
So when Liverpool it's where, especially not too far from where I live, like it can be quite impoverished. So there's homeless people outside supermarkets and whatnot. And some people go in, some supermarkets don't have anything, like they're just just about surviving themselves, myself included, some months. Yeah, so it's interesting to see them just completely ignore the homeless person.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like within that person, there's a bit of a struggle between the need, the instinct to preserve themselves over doing something selfless, like giving them money that you may need to buy something. Because if you think about it, like how many people would go hungry themselves to feed someone even hungrier?
Yeah, it is a difficult, tension, and having to engage in that kind of, moral thinking on a regular basis can be like very emotionally exhausting. I live in a big city and I live in a neighborhood with a lot of homeless people. And so I can't walk down the street without seeing homeless people and often being asked for money. And it's just, most of the time I'm not in a position to give them money. And I try to, give money to, I find having to make that moral choice constantly very stressful. So I think, I do what a lot of people do, which is that I typically don't give homeless people money, but I try to give, some larger sum of money to a charity that helps homeless people, at the end of the year or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just, it is very difficult. I'm not going to say that that's necessarily like a tension with instinct, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because we do sometimes have like conflicting instincts, if that makes sense. Yeah, like the sort of like pro-social instinct and the sort of like more selfish, self-protective instinct are like, they're both instincts, if you get what I'm saying. And they're probably about equally old. I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, but these are both things that our ancient ancestors had to contend with, right? Not the exact same situation, but situations regarding, resources and allocation of resources is definitely, something that humanity has been doing for a very, very long time.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
New activation and upfront payment for 3-month plan required. Taxes and fees extra. Additional restrictions apply. See mintmobile.com for full terms.
It is interesting, and again, it's another contradiction, and it's within us, within our makeup.
Yeah,
these sort of conflicted instincts.
Yeah,
I just think it makes us complex and it makes us interesting.
Definitely, yeah. People are very interesting.
And as writers, there we go. That's the what we're trying to hammer home here is this is the source. This is why people are interested in difference and varies, and this is how we understand them. And then when we understand them, it's easier to create them. So something that I was going to ask you about, which is something that we studied in law school when we were doing jurisprudence, And there was a couple of scenarios, and I always really like putting yourself in these situations. I think I mentioned one to you before, didn't I, about the runaway trolley?
Yeah.
So basically, there's a runaway train cart or a trolley or a train, whatever you want to imagine, flying down a hill, brakes gone, can't stop. There's 50 people on board, and as it's going down the track, you essentially are the line conductor or controller, and you've got the choice of sending this runaway cart in one of two directions. In the first direction, you can let it run and it'll hit and kill one person, but all 50 people on the cart will survive. Or you can send it the other way, and the one person will survive, but all 50 people on the cart will die.
Yeah.
So what do you choose?
Oh God, I don't know.
It's interesting though, isn't it? I think it's you get it. Yeah.
The thing that's interesting is I'm pretty sure that you get different results whether or not people have to actively choose to harm the one person, right?
Yeah.
Because people don't want to actively choose to do harm, right? It's a sort of, blame thing, right? So it's not just pure utilitarianism. It's also what you as a person specifically have done, right? So, if I do nothing and more people live, I'd probably do that. But would I be able to actively hurt the one person in order to save 50? I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting way. It's like the manner in which the one person is killed. But I think that the original argument is sort of questioning the value of life and whose life's more important, the lives of 50 people or the lives of one person, and who decides which life is more important as well. It's an impossible question to answer, I think. Yeah.
You don't want to have to be in a position where you're deciding whose life is more important,
Yeah, exactly. The other example that I have for you is 4 starving sailors stranded at sea on a little sailboat. We mentioned that one to you before. And so basically, 4 starving sailors, they're all going to die. One of them is weaker and is likely to die sooner than the other 3. But the other 3 won't survive much longer unless they have something to eat. So the question is, do they kill the one person, the one weak person, and eat them so that they survive? Or do they all die and not eat them?
You see, this is where disgust comes into a factor with moral reasoning, and disgust actually is a very big factor in a lot of moral reasonings, especially in the purity moral foundation. We'll get into moral foundations theory later, but certain people are going to have different responses to the concept of cannibalism, right? So it's not just about who lives and who dies, or, if they all die, and it's not just about sacrifice. It's about specifically the societal taboos and the disgust around the specific act, right? For me, I have a deep-seated fear and disgust of cannibalism. It freaks me the hell out, so much. So in this situation, I jump off the boat and voluntarily die, which is not like a utilitarian answer in any way. That is purely disgust motivated, but that is honestly what I do.
Yeah, I think I'd do that as well, to be honest.
Yeah, right? Because it's the disgust thing, right?
Yeah, I'm not feeding you today. You can all die if you're going to eat me. You mentioned moral foundation theory there.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So it's this theory of moral psychology that basically there are 5 main moral foundations, and there are 5 core to the theory. A few others have been proposed, and if a new one is found, that doesn't disprove the theory, but these are the 5 main ones used. Let me pull up the list. I do have it up. There we go. So the first of these foundations is the care foundation versus harm, then sort of fairness versus cheating, loyalty versus betrayal, authority versus subversion, and sanctity versus degradation. And so the idea there is basically that different people and different groups rely on their different foundations to different degrees. And that's sort of why different people have different morality.
How do you think then writers could apply that to the creation of their characters?
Yeah. Oh, I do want to say first that some of the authors who put this theory forward do kind of say that we should value all of these foundations equally. And in the context of political psychology, that's something I very strongly disagree with, because if you're relying very heavily on, for example, the purity foundation, that can lead to things like homophobia. So I don't think that all of these foundations are equally moral. They're just all present in moral reasoning. Sorry, that is a really important distinction I felt the need to make.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is, when it comes to writing, I think it's important to figure out sort of what the moral system of your character is and what weight they're going to put on, different foundations. There is actually a little quiz you can do of there's a website called My Moral Foundations or whatever that is actually being used to collect data. So if you're doing it for a fictional character, try and indicate that in some way so they don't put it in the data set. But
ruin the whole study.
Yeah, I mean, probably not if you're only doing it for a few people. They have, I think at this point, thousands of data points. It fall into the noise. But what I was going to say is, it's useful to figure out sort of what foundations your characters are relying on more heavily, right? You could have, a very fairness-oriented character, a character who cares a lot about, authority, and it doesn't, and very much, loyalty to the in-group and that sort of thing. And that character is going to have, a very different set of values than a character who doesn't think about that very much, but cares a lot about, care and fairness and that kind of thing. And also, these sort of foundations are kind of influenced by the environment that a character has grown up in, right? So, if they've grown up in a very puritanical religious culture, unless they're rebelling against that, they're likely to have, they're likely to rely pretty heavily on the authority foundation, the purity foundation, and also probably the loyalty foundation. But, if a character grew up in sort of a more, I don't have a fantasy equivalent of this, but let's say a liberal background, they're, more likely to rely more on the care and harm foundation and the fairness and cheating foundation. And the fairness foundation, which I think is also often called the equality moral foundation. There are a number of different names for the foundations. Yeah. So it's, different characters can have different moral systems. And also that's a way where, because characters have different, moral systems, that's a way for them to be in conflict. Also, certain elements of some of these moral foundations are not what I would think of as moral, if you get what I'm saying. And so that is a good way to have, characters who are, who think of themselves as moral, but are not the good guys, if you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
You can have a character who has a really strong moral code based off of, say, purity and authority primarily. And that could be a fundamentally evil character, but with their own very strong moral code.
That's really interesting. I was going to actually ask you about.
Oh, and I'm not saying that everything that falls under the purity foundation is inherently immoral, but there's a lot of stuff under there that's very, repressive.
I think if you lean to that sort of extreme, you're only going to take a definitive stance on things, aren't you? You're not going to compromise, really.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how strongly you lean on things, right? But yeah, no, there are definitely people who have more compromising or more uncompromising morality. I mean, the tendency to have a more sort of black and white worldview is definitely something that, varies person to person. I mean, coming from political psychology, a lot of it is people who want to think about the world less, who have a preference for a lower cognitive load, are more likely to have a very black and white worldview and be very sort of absolutist about things. So, yeah, I mean, it is important to keep in mind that not everybody's going to be equally flexible in their thinking about morality or really anything important.
And just sticking on with political psychology, I understand you've been working on some new videos about people's politics and psychology and how that relates to sexual preferences and relationships.
Yeah. So I'm working on 2 videos at the moment, one of which should be out in time for Valentine's Day. So that'll probably be before this podcast episode comes out. And that one is about how people's fantasies and sexual preferences vary across the political spectrum. And that's in both the US and UK context. I'll give away that one of the big things is that conservatives do also tend to be sort of more sexually conservative, but there's a lot more really interesting nuance than that. So I would encourage people to like check out the video. It's going to be a fun one. The one I put out more recently, it had some fun bits, but the one I did about the psychology of sexism was much more like, serious and important. As a follow-up to the one on sexual preferences and politics, I'm going to do something that was actually initially supposed to be like part of the first video, but then I realized I had enough material for 2, which is going to be about like dating across party lines and, the effects that politics have on relationships, if that makes sense. Because there is like a very strong tendency for people to partner up with someone like with the same politics or similar politics to them. And I do also think that probably carries over a bit into fantasy settings because, if you have characters, who are, in a relationship together or even not a romantic relationship, just, working together or friends or that kind of thing. I think it is important to keep in mind, where their morality clashes and where their politics clash, where they align, that kind of thing. And, what kind of tensions those are likely to exist within a relationship. Although within relationships, part of the reason is probably not people like selecting for someone from the same, say, political party or ideology as them. It's more that ideology and party and that kind of thing correlate a lot to personality and temperament and all that kind of thing. And also probably morality. And people tend to gravitate and stay with people who, generally view the world a similar way to they do and interact with it, in a more similar way. I mean, people definitely complement each other in relationships, but opposites don't really attract. That's like not really a thing.
I think it's just like you say, from the writing perspective, it's so interesting to know that, like you say, people generally group together based on their interests and how easy it is as a writer to just add conflict to all of their lives by introducing something that goes against that belief.
Yeah.
And it's really that easy. Just introduce a character that believes the opposite and he antagonizes people, and you've simply got an antagonist there, haven't you? And
yeah, definitely
disrupts the balance. And
and I think it's also important to keep in mind that like if you're going to have characters be like very ideologically different, you should also probably have them be different in like personality ways and stuff too. You're not necessarily going to find people who like act exactly the same but have completely different views on everything.
Yeah. There's so much scope to create unique things. Even in fantasy, which feels like everything's been done, but every time and time again, people are proving that there's still loads to be tapped into. So yeah,
definitely.
Fantastic. I think exploring things like psychology as well is a really good way to find the originality now, making characters more real.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. It's been fantastic chatting with you again, Abby, about psychology today, and I hope everyone out there has learned something new. I've taken away loads from this, and I'm looking forward to implementing it now when I'm going back now and editing characters and whatnot. Abby, how can we find out a bit more about you? So
the main thing would be the YouTube channel. So that's Political Psych with Abby. You can just put that into YouTube and you should find me by searching. But there'll also be a link in the podcast description, I assume, right?
Yeah, most definitely.
Okay, great. And then I also have an Instagram and a Reddit account where I post psychology stuff, but also like cute pictures of my cats.
Nice.
And that'll, I don't know, probably be in the description, or you can find it via my YouTube channel. And if you find my stuff and you really, really like it and you want to help me like pay for books and stuff, I've just started a Patreon.
Oh, cool. Definitely check that out. And please do check out Abby's YouTube channel as well. It's full of really interesting things, and you're going to learn a lot to inspire characters and to help you create characters as well. A big thank you again to Abby for taking the time to teach us all a bit about what makes us tick. My 2 chats so far with Abby have been so illuminating and inspiring, and I've found myself applying what she said to my own characters. I hope you found it just as useful as me. Remember, if you have any requests for subjects or topics, please email into the fantasywriterstoolshed@gmail.com. I've had some great requests lately, and I'll say this, everyone who does offer their input, I do reward with a nice free gift. I won't say what, but it's usually a writing class or a book. We'll be back on the 14th of May with another well-building centric episode, this time looking at the jobs people did in the Middle Ages and how those roles have found their way into the fantasy genre. So think blacksmiths, alchemists, the good old farmer. So be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss that episode. And don't forget, you can continue your learning beyond this episode by heading over to our Patreon page. You can find writing classes and books all focused on fantasy, which you can get access to right away. And don't forget, you can join our writing group too. It's literally the perfect place to learn new things and to network with like-minded writers, to get advice on your stories, help each other out with your writing. And honestly, I think it's working with other people is one of the best ways and the quickest ways to get better as a writer. If you did enjoy today's episode, I'd be ever so grateful if you could leave us a review or a rating. Please also share the show with anyone you think may be interested, as well as on the likes of Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Like I said at the start, we do this purely for love. We don't make a penny. So any little bit of help you can offer us makes the world of difference. And that is about all for today. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with a new episode on the 14th of May. And until then, keep on scribbling.